showing anybody in here, so we don't have to worry about that. It's just we don't have the box that we usually have, so it's going up against the wall, and I have to take care of something here first off. All right. Kim, I may have to have you check this because you've been, I think it's going. Yep, there it is. I can't see what I'm doing.
Here, let me get it.
I think I got it now. All right. Well, usually we keep things pretty open and informal here, so anything happening in the news? Anything coming up this week? What's happening tomorrow?
We're gonna stay on the corner and get yelled at again.
Okay.
At Bill Eaton Park, Bowman Howell, Chapel Hill, noon to 3. Stop the steal type rally. We're planning on hopefully having a larger crowd than normal. It's gonna be different, I guess. I'll have to bring all my signs and I have the one camera, so figure it out.
Six. Yeah. Well,
That's our G date, man.
it may well be.
We'll have to see.
But, when we think about January 6th, that passage in 1 Timothy chapter 2, we've talked about it a lot, where he says in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, I exhort therefore that first of all, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. I was talking about this with Pastor Lutz, and
I was listening.
we combined our programs, and it's beyond me, and this is what I mentioned when we were talking about it for the radio, is these pastors and churches who don't think you should touch on politics. Because if you look at this passage, what is it saying here? Who are we to pray for? Kings and all that are in authority. Well, who's that? That's our political leaders, aren't they? Isn't that? Now, how do you know how to pray for kings and all that are in authority unless you talk about what they're doing, right?
Yep.
I mean, am I far off on this? Maybe I'm imagining this, but it just seems to me if you're going to pray for somebody in authority, if you're going to pray for a ruler, if you're going to pray for a governmental authority, you need to pay attention to what they're doing. Because if they're not saved, should we at least pray for their salvation? But if you don't pay attention to them, how do you know whether they're saved or not? If they're doing something that's promoting, biblical values, then we can pray and thank God for that. But if they're doing something that's not endorsing biblical values, well, how will we know unless we pay attention to them? And of course, the excuse is, well, this distracts from reaching people with the gospel. Well,
But we got COVID, so everybody's hiding under their bed.
but here's the thing. Look at the passage again. He says, pray for them. Then the very next verse 3 says, for this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior. And pause there for a minute. He's saying it's good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior to pray for those who are in government authorities. And then he says in verse 4, a continuation of the sentence that started in verse 3, who will have all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. So here's God talking in one passage, one sentence, verses 1 and 2, telling us to be aware of what the government officials are doing so we can pray for them. And then in the next passage, in verses 2 and 3, where it's the next sentence, in that sentence saying, it's good and acceptable to do this because God wants people to be saved. So, think about it. Little analytical thought here. Maybe, just maybe, what God's saying here is if you want to have freedom to preach the gospel, if you want to be able to reach people and see people come to Christ, you better pray for those that are in authority.
Yeah,
I mean,
because Bill Federer, I was listening to him,
Mhm.
and he brought up Ahaz and Jezebel, and what they were doing, and what God did to Israel because of what they were doing.
Uh-huh.
Because the people didn't, the Jews didn't get up there and say, "Hey, God, we got this madman in charge here. Get rid of him." They just let him run wild.
But of course, you had Elijah coming in there, and he certainly talked about what they were doing.
Yep.
He spent a little bit of time addressing the evils of the day
Mhm.
and the government excess of the day. So, yeah, that's why this is
And
important.
John the Baptist he did the exact same thing with what was that, Herod, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. He called Herod out, and Herod said, "We're taking your head off, dude."
John the
Mhm.
Baptist, he must have lost sight of his true mission, because
Yes.
if he'd have known, he would have known his mission was to preach the gospel, not get involved in politics.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
But
There's
still,
so many people preach that. I'll just focus on something. Just focus on something.
But I mean, I read this right there. This tells me you gotta pay attention to what's happening in the world around you if you want to be able to effectively reach people. So, unless those two sentences have nothing to do with each other, but I kind of think that's not the case. I kind of think they have a lot to do with each other.
well, he brought up what Stalin was doing over there in Russia,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like everybody, those people were literally cheering him up because he was lying to them on the one hand,
Mm-hmm.
victimizing them on the other, and turning around and saying, "No, it's the white Russians and the Jews that are doing this to you."
Are you saying government officials might lie?
Oh yeah.
Surprise, surprise. Anybody catch the latest on Fauci? Well, I lied to you back in the spring. Or did you lie now? When are you lying? Because once he's admitting that he lied,
Because that one
then,
doctor got up there and
mhm.
he's like, we might as well just cut this out.
Yeah,
It's like,
and-
this is crazy.
Yeah,
I'm getting
what's wrong with that?
because they changed their mind like
But you gotta be in there.
He was doing it for our own good.
yeah. And this doctor, he brought up the one fact. He goes, "I'm not your doctor. I can't give you medical advice. I don't know where these people are getting off."
Well,
And he brought up malpractice insurance, and he goes, "My malpractice insurance tells me I can't be a doctor and for everybody." So, and he brought up what my mom told me when I was a little kid. It's like, because I asked her, see, something happened. She was telling me about this car wreck, and this guy, Congo Falls Fire Department brought him in, and he says, "I'm leaving." And because he was conscious, even though he was bleeding like crazy out of his head, he got up and walked out of the emergency room because he refused treatment.
mhm.
But when he got outside, I guess it was either the state police or the county sheriff arrested him for DUI. And they said, you should have, if you would have stayed in there and got the treatment, we wouldn't be arresting you right now. It's like, because they brought him to the hospital, and he told them, "We'll take you to the hospital and get you checked out." And they never brought that up, but when he tried to sneak out of the emergency room, they said, "Well, now we got you."
Well, the other thing too, Kim and I were talking about this earlier. We were supposed to reach herd immunity and when 70% of the people have been exposed. And now apparently that's changed. Fauci's changed that to 90%. And remember in the spring, well, just a couple of months of all this stuff and we'll be okay. When we get a vaccine, we got a vaccine. And I actually heard Fauci say this. We should be ready to open up by early fall. He didn't say what year. So I'm not gonna hold him to 21 on that.
That's
So
what
that's his latest. And then the governor, what's the governor's latest thing? You know, the quarantine, or not, the curfew has done so well, meaning it's not done a thing. Because of all the holiday celebrations, we need to extend it to the January 23rd. Well, wait a minute. Today's the 1st. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
I need help here because, you know, the governor knows more than me. His math's better. Kim, you're an RN. How long are you supposed to quarantine after exposure?
10 to 14.
10 to 14 days. Okay, that would bring us to, let's just be generous and say the 15th of the month. So the 23rd is, say, 15, which comes first? 23 or 15? I'm trying to figure this out.
It's more of that Democrat math.
So 15 comes, see, 8 days before the 23rd. If he's worried about people being exposed during Christmas and New Year's, why does the thing run to the 23rd and not the 15th, for one thing?
How can he put, first of all, his 10 o'clock curfew that he has, why his 10 o'clock curfew, it's unconstitutional, it's not law. I've been out several times after 10.
Oh, I've been frequently out after 10.
This virus, this Chinese virus, it's not gonna go to bed at a certain time of the day and say we're gonna pick on people during the hours of,
Yeah,
it doesn't matter if you're out at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 10 o'clock at night, midnight, what have you, it's out there.
Well, the virus has become the boogeyman, because it used to be, you better get in before it gets too late, the boogeyman will get you. Now it's the virus will get you. But fact of the matter is that, you know, you got less than 1% chance of dying if you get the thing.
You know, I had something going on at the beginning of September, and it was kind of freaking me out. And my doctor, she wouldn't see me, but she said, we spoke through FaceTime, and she said that I have the symptoms of the Chinese virus. She said coronavirus. I call it Chinese virus because it did come from Wuhan. But the fact is she said that I did have the symptoms of this coronavirus, but I was not tested. And these symptoms, I was sick for almost a month. It was 2 weeks before that I was sick, before I even called the doctor. The doctor said, my doctor at UH said, no way, we're not going to see you. If you have an iPhone, we'll FaceTime. But she said, just stay inside, rest. We're going to put you on a antibiotic. They put me on a 5-day antibiotic. I don't know if it helped or not, but regardless, I can't say that I had it 100%, but she is assuming that I had it because I had the symptoms of it. I never had a fever, but this was back in September.
Well, we know of somebody who never had any symptoms, never tested positive, even though she was tested, and yet recently tested positive for antibodies. Which means somewhere along the line she had it.
Yeah.
Even though she never tested positive.
yeah, that's like my sister. She's got all those, she's got 5 of the things that literally, you know, she has to be careful even when it's flu season.
Oh, yeah.
And
Where
she
she
is.
works.
Yeah. And they told her 10 days after she had tested positive for it. And she's like, what? And all they told me to do, well, being that you're just tested positive, you know, hey, just stay in your house for 14 days. You can still go to the store, you know. And I'm like,
Well, yeah,
I can't figure that one out.
yeah, the greatest danger still remains for people who are elderly or have
Yeah.
strong underlying conditions.
Yeah.
You know, or I should say strong, but, you know, various underlying conditions such, what's the big ones? Asthma's a big one, and
Heart.
yeah,
Heart.
heart and respiratory mostly.
Yep.
And
Basically, it's the kind of comorbidities that during the flu season, they tell you that if you have these things, the
you know,
flu is bad, stay home.
And that's been our philosophy, is we treat this like you would the flu.
That's what
Or
that
the
one
flu
doctor
kills
was saying,
people.
and it's like, yeah,
What is it, 45, 65,000 people a year
Yep.
die from the flu in the United States every year. Nobody hears about it.
Yep.
And every year during flu season, the hospitals report the rooms are full. Hospitals are full. They're turning away people because the rooms are full. It happens every year during flu season. Now, for some reason, all of a sudden, it's never happened before. Why? The hospitals are 90% full. It happens every year during flu season. People forget these things. They don't pay attention.
and it's probably the flu that's taking people out
In many cases.
instead of COVID, because the same symptoms that you get with the flu is the same what happens with COVID. It's like, wow, that's that point that that doctor was making, and he's like, then you go back and you look at all the mistakes, and he said there was like 4.5 million false positives. I mean, that number was way up there. And he's like, if they can't even get a simple test, you know,
Well, remember, the Summit County Health Director, Skoda, said that on TV that just because you can't expect, or how'd she say it? Just because,
You can't expect to take another test and expect to get the same answer.
yeah, but you shouldn't have doubt in the test results. So like with anything, you take reasonable precautions.
Yeah.
And try to do the best that
when
you
it's
can.
flu season, I'm always,
But a lot of people are getting it. Because there is a distinct virus going around that's not the flu or the cold. And I remember last year at this time, we were talking about people are getting this weird thing, and it would hang on for a while. And nobody knows what it is. The medical director where Kim works said that he was treating people, in January last year, gave him a flu test. And they didn't have the flu, and he didn't know what
But
it
they would
was.
have flu symptoms.
They have flu-like symptoms, and he would send them home and just say, stay home and all that. And that's when the strain that was a year ago, and actually it was circulating, they've now shown as early as November of 2019, that
2018.
2018. It was here all.
I'm sorry.
2019, yeah. That strain at that time was actually had a higher mortality rate than what's going around now. Now, of course, you got the latest one, that's the variant out of the UK, which is more transmissible, which they're more contagious, which is one thing, but it's no more lethal than what's going around now. And one of the things that happens when these viruses go out like this, the more lethal strains burn out quicker, because if they kill their host,
that's it.
then that's it for them. But the less lethal the virus is, the longer it'll stick around, because the more people it can infect and live in, people get, they get a head cold, they think, or they get a mild flu. I've talked to about a dozen people in the last 2 weeks that have all had this, and it's ranged from I didn't even know I had it until I had a test, to a mild cold, to a serious cold, to mild flu. Only one person, and he's Kim and I's age, and he was with us down in the Samoan Islands in the 1990s when the dengue fever outbreak went through, and he said it's the worst thing I had since dengue fever. So he's on this end, and most everybody's grouped toward the other end of hardly even knew I had anything. The biggest common denominator, though, I think with everybody has been just very tired. Very tired. Chris Long, you hear him on the radio. It went through his whole family, and he had it, his wife had it, a number of his kids had it, his older brother and his wife had it, and several other family members all had it here in December. And then, of course, it's just numbers of people in the area that I know of that have had it and different things. Now, there are people who do die from it, and they're generally people who have underlying health conditions and elderly. Back in April, I did a funeral for somebody who died at that nursing home that's out there in Parma that was in the news because it was one of the first hotbeds of the different care facilities. And this individual, she was somebody who had severe health problems, very challenged, and it acted as a catalyst. It hurried up, her demise.
What they're doing is they're giving the disease a full credit for
Mhm.
things, for cases in which it's just a contributing factor.
Right, and I know of somebody who fought it. He was in the hospital. The doctor said that he was COVID-free, but his heart was so weakened, he's 92 and a half years old. His heart was so weakened, because he already had heart problems, that he didn't last in recovery. They were getting ready to release him. They said he was COVID-free. So he survived the COVID, but he died of the after effects because it taxed his heart too much.
It's like that patient up there where my sister works. She was 104.
Yeah.
And they were like, and I'm sitting there thinking, I figure when you get past 90, it could be any day. So, why stress it? And when you get past 100, it's a sure thing that's going to be happening.
There was a thing.
And
in
it's
the paper.
just odd the way she explained it. And I'm like, she was 104, Lisa. It's like, she could get that bird flu from a mosquito. And,
Oh, yeah. Swine flu, anything.
Exactly.
You brought up where your sister worked. We're in Richfield Village right here, and Richfield Township is around here.
She's just south of.
They're in the township. They're Richfield Township, and the Richfield
What's that road?
Township on Broadview Road.
Right.
Broadview Road, Regina Healthcare.
Yep.
But Richfield Township has less people than Richfield Village. Together, it's under 6,000, I think, or something like that. But the township and the village have the same police department and fire department, Richfield Police and Richfield Fire and Rescue. Well, the fire chief gives a report at the village council meetings, and he also gives a report as a result at the township meetings, trustee meetings. And at the trustee meeting in the middle of December, he announced that Richfield Township had 44 cases of coronavirus, and the village had like 7 or 8, something like that. And one of the township trustees said, well, why has the township got so many more? Any ideas?
Because of
And
Regina.
it was Regina. I thought of your sister immediately when I read that, because
She
the
said that's
vast
exactly
bulk
what
of
happened.
the cases, that's where they're at. They're in places like that. And almost all of those 44 cases, if not all of them, were in
Mhm.
Regina.
That's what she said. It did. She goes, it went through there like crazy. They test everybody, and they're like, they locked the place down. Nobody could get in or out unless you
Mhm.
actually worked there.
Most places have been like that for months.
She's gonna take another test and it's coming Monday. So, but so far they've only had of all the patients up there, only that one died. So everybody else pulled through.
And that's really pretty good because they had quite a few cases.
Yeah.
Um,
She goes, that's what she told me, but I haven't asked her lately. But she goes, that was the only patient that had died. But she was kind of boiling over because she goes, I took that test 10 days ago and now they tell me. It's like,
I see a lot of nursing homes are doing the rapid test where that you find out right when you take it. They're doing it
well,
like some places
what's
twice a week.
what's that solution that turns different colors for different diseases? That's the kind of test you want to get.
Well, what they're doing is, I mean, this is the rapid test that a lot of nursing homes are using. It's like a pregnancy test.
Yeah.
One line you're not pregnant, or you don't have it, 2 lines you got it.
that solution test is it's like a mini incubator is what it does. The solution actually heats up the virus. Because a lot of times they'll put it in a test tube and it'll run it through, I forget what that thing's called. And it just heats it up to a certain degree and then it'll check and see how many parts per million did it just expand.
No,
And they can use it-
those are the,
I can't think of what
those
that's
are more
called.
like the overnight tests that they do.
Yeah. But the solution that they use actually, when they stick it in there, they use a cotton swab and actually it reacts to the cotton and it generates heat. And that's and whatever comes out, if it changes color, then you're infected. I'm trying to think what that stuff's called. But
But with all that
Yeah.
going on, obviously there's other things going on in the world right now
Mhm.
that are more pressing concern probably. Because, the situation
Yeah.
this week, for instance, we look at what's scheduled for Washington DC on Wednesday, I believe it is. I don't know if anybody has
I've seen, I forget which one was it, but he had the deer caught in headlights look. He was sitting there and I just caught a glimpse of him on the news and he's just like, whoa, it's, Biden won. And I'm looking at this guy, I'm like, he looks scared to death.
Sanders is going up there, but.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of buses from Northeast Ohio going.
Oh, yeah.
Free Ohio now, Free Ohio now, there's 7 at the moment.
7 for them themselves or what they know of.
That they know of. Some of them are the people that,
Charter bus
No.
companies are making a
Yeah.
fortune off this.
some of them are.
They're running out of buses.
I heard there were many as 140 House of Representatives
Mm-hmm.
who are thinking of voting against this.
And there's at least 2 senators.
Findings.
I believe it's up to 9 now.
We should be,
Yep.
we should be contacting Portman and urging him to not certify. I don't know if it's
I
gonna be
haven't
good.
heard anything from him or
I wish
private.
I could say that he would listen, but I don't have a feeling he's not going to listen to that.
Well, there is an event, what is that, on the 3rd, specifically, where is Portman, I don't know where his office is, but there's somewhere in Terrace Park, Ohio, wherever the heck that is. They are having an event to try to get his attention. I'm not planning on going to it, but,
I wonder how the party at the White House went last night.
I don't know.
There was a big New Year's Eve party at
I
the
heard
White
that.
House last night. I heard that the mayor and the police chief were helpful.
It didn't seem to make
They
the
were helpful
news.
in previous events, yeah.
What's
It
that?
didn't seem to make the news.
Well, of course, they don't want to put that in
Yeah,
the
that's
news.
true,
I
too,
mean,
yeah.
it doesn't look good for the governor to have a party in front of his house on New Year's
Especially if
Eve.
it was peaceful, never make the news.
We didn't get invited, especially when it was after curfew. They were breaking curfew.
I wonder if the governor was there. He was probably down in, Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands, like a number of other politicians of late have been over the holidays. The latest was a woman who was for some Chicago teachers union group or whatever, and she was sending messages from the poolside in Puerto Rico about how it's unsafe to travel and we can't reopen the schools because it's not safe to leave your houses. And she's poolside down in Puerto Rico. And how many governors and other government officials have been down in Puerto Rico and Cancun and the Virgin Islands and stuff over the Christmas holidays, or Hawaii, saying it's not safe to travel. And then when they get caught, they all seem to say, well, I used misjudgment. Judgment. They did it on purpose. You know, it's okay for them to tell the little people not to do things, but for them, none of this matters. Yeah, de Blasio, did anybody see that? New Year's Eve, de Blasio said nobody should be out in Times Square. And where's de Blasio on New Year's Eve? He's out with his wife on Times Square.
Watching a ball.
What? And he said nobody should be out here, and there he was. There's a picture of him and his wife kissing it at midnight.
It's like Animal Farm all over again.
Yeah,
Yes.
everybody's equal except some are more equal than others, and it's unreal. And there's concern now on the left that people aren't believing them anymore. You wonder why?
Oh,
They just
wow.
amp up the hysteria. If you ever,
Well, yeah.
if you look at the YouTube suggested clips, you know, oh no, this new, even more contagious strain.
Yes, and it's always something more to try to. Oops, here we are.
They arrested a few protesters in Portland. I like to
Yeah.
rub it in because my wife's from Oregon. So I rub it in a little bit.
Is there anything left up there in Portland though?
Hardly. I don't know.
Because that one mayor, it's like the people of Oregon want her arrested. They,
Just relax.
They don't have anything on their page about how the party at DeWine's house went.
Oh. They don't want to say too much, probably, I guess.
Well, they post it normally.
Oh, I mean, I thought you were talking about the paper, not the media, not them. Never mind.
No, you'd have to look at most of the stuff they posted on the Free Ohio Now Facebook page. That's if they're letting us post it. Recently, I've been trying to, anytime we post anything that mentions COVID, they say, hey, you're about to post something that mentions
and they
DeWine.
do. And with that in mind, Mark Levin, I guess, is now completely pulled off from Facebook. And apparently here in the next few weeks, a great many of the big name conservatives are going to close their Facebook accounts. And of course, Facebook hasn't been too worried right now because they're making tons of money. But some of these accounts that they're making tons of money off from
well,
are going to suddenly disappear because they are building an alternate social media area like Parler and Rumble and MeWe and USA.life and
Well-
things like that are alternatives.
yeah. And the U.S. Senate overrode a veto for the armed services bill that had the protection for Facebook and where they couldn't be sued for censorship.
Number of newspapers around the country are starting to go digital. I know there are two papers, I think, in Oregon that are going to a
Yeah, I heard that today.
once a week.
They're not making it, the picture you can hold in your hands is not making any money. It's why the plain dealer dropped to 3 days a week
Yeah.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
So then the information goes digital and they've got control of all of that. So
Well, and see, that's another thing. Right now, they're in the one phase where the social media and some of these other media outlets, for instance, if you search on Google, it's covering up lots of information. They are purposely steering you in certain directions. Facebook, Twitter, all them, YouTube. I had a thing linked on YouTube and it disappeared because YouTube is no longer allowing that video to be seen. They're blatantly censoring now. And that's where a number of conservatives are actually starting to put money into these other networks so that there's an alternative because they believe that perhaps around about the 6th, that the Googles and the Facebooks and the Twitters and the YouTubes are going to shut down everything from people like us.
they had something on a blurb that I caught on the news that was, I think it was YouTube or Twitter. In order to you take a YouTube video and pass it on, or to take another Twitter thing and pass it on. Before that, all you had to do was click on it once, and they changed that just before, I'm not sure if it was before the election. I don't think it went back that far. But they changed it to where you had to click twice. Now, that's pretty insignificant. But if you didn't know it, think of the number of people who thought they were passing something on, and it never passed on because they didn't click twice.
Yeah,
Now,
and then-
now they went back to once again. They changed it back. So there's definite manipulation there to try and control, what people are trying to pass around.
And the defense bill was passed, which was a bad for Trump wanted to talk about this issue.
Yeah, there's a number of things that are going because some people were concerned with Trump being pressured to sign the stimulus bill because it has that thing in there that removes his ability supposedly to institute an insurrection act. Well, apparently that doesn't come into play right away. There's 45 days before that will come into play. So he could have signed it, knowing that he doesn't need to worry about it.
Yeah, because it's still in the Constitution. He can use it anytime he wants.
There's a number of things, but
Yeah.
let me read something here. And this is where we're talking about all the corona and we're talking about what's happening with the social media and all that. But as Christians, we need to have our focus on what the Bible has to say. And we've talked a lot about 2 Thessalonians, and I want to read something that is, this is not in obscure sites anymore. But in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, I just want to read it again in verses 6 and 7. And now you know what withholdeth, that he, meaning the Antichrist, the son of perdition, is what he taught, the name given here, the man of sin. And now you know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time. Verse 7, for the mystery of iniquity doth already work, only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. And letteth there is the same word as withholdeth in the previous verse, because it's being used in the restraining sense, not in the permissive sense, which is the way it's used in legal documents without let or hindrance. Let is used in a restraining sense. So this was just published and updated today. This is by Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab is the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. This is the guy that, with some obscure guy, maybe you've heard of him, Prince Charles of England, maybe anybody hear of him? Him and Prince Charles made a big thing last year, I want to say about May or something, or March or May of last year, about the projected Great Reset. And this term that's going around, this is stuff, like I said, I've been reading about this since the 70s, and it's always been kind of buried in the corners, and, you got to be some kind of conspiracy for that. But when this Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, and the International Monetary Fund is signed on to this, the Secretary of the UN is signed on to this, Prince Charles of England is signed on to this, the Pope is signed on to this. They're all endorsing what Schwab is doing. And Schwab's not the only one by any means doing this. But this is what he posted in an updated article that was posted today. 2021 should be the year of the Great Reset. The pandemic has reminded us that we cannot aim solely for higher GDP and profits on the assumption that maximizing these indicators automatically redounds to the benefit of society. A renewed focus on public health, net zero pledges, and the arrival of stakeholder capitalism metrics will ensure that 2021 will be a new year zero. And in reference to the year zero, he says the year ahead could be a historic one, and in a positive way. 75 years after the original year zero that followed World War II, we once again have a chance to rebuild. The process after 1945 was literal, building anew from the wreckage of war. Now, what happened following World War II? We also had the establishment of what? The UN, right? And he's calling that a year zero, where the world radically changed.
But you know why they came up with the UN?
Because the League of Nations was failing. The UN is basically the League of Nations
Part
point
two.
two. Yeah. So he says, we must aim for a higher degree of societal sophistication and create a sound basis for the well-being of all people and the planet. Now, I'm not going to read through everything in here, but there's three things that he says have to take place. He says, I see three pillars to build on. First, 2021 could be the year when we bring COVID-19 under control. All the stuff we were talking about, the masks and the shutdowns and the quarantine or what I want to say, all this stuff that they're talking about is designed for a purpose.
Yep.
Because whenever in the course of human history have we done these ridiculous things for a disease less than 1% mortality? Never. There's diseases out there with far greater mortality than what this has.
That's like I was telling you, when I was like 4 or 5 years old,
Mm-hmm.
Hong Kong flu came through. I
Yeah.
was sick for maybe a week.
Yeah.
Didn't go to the hospital, but
And it
man,
was,
oh, man.
yeah, there was a lot more people dying. So the first one that they're building on is supposedly bringing COVID-19 under control. Only through using draconian global measures is this going to happen. The next thing that he has, and also those measures don't go away.
right.
Remember in March, we're going to shut down for, yeah, and then that'll flatten the curve and we'll take care. Oh, well, no, we need to stay shut down a little longer. Finally, they couldn't keep us shut down. And so what do they do? Do this, do that. And every time it comes to the end, what do? Well, just a little longer.
Yep.
Well, just a little longer. Anybody ever have kids where you're trying to get them to go to bed at a certain time? They say, can I just stay up a couple minutes longer? If you listen to that long enough, how long will they stay up? For a while, huh?
Johnny Carson
Well,
been going off
yeah.
at 1:30 in the morning.
And
You're
they're still
up?
saying it, yeah, and they're still saying just a little longer.
Yeah.
And that's what these guys are doing. They're like, just a little longer. So now here's the second thing. Second, 2021 will be the year when every major government, as well as broad private sector coalitions, commit to a net zero target for greenhouse gas emissions.
Carbon tax.
Green New Deal.
Yep.
And they're citing here, with Joe Biden having been elected president, the U.S. is expected to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement and aim for 100% clean energy and net zero emissions by 2050. Now, in the first place, the United States had not, President Trump, said we're not going to do anything with the Paris Climate Accords. We've actually cut our emissions more than what the Paris Climate Accords said that we had to by this time. So this business that the Trump administration is killing the environment, that's what they're painting here.
Yeah.
So what does this tell you where the globalists want to see our election go?
For Biden.
Biden, because Biden is the one that will lead them into this. So first one is using the coronavirus to use public health as a reason to get rid of your individual rights and your local control. Second is the greenhouse gas nonsense. And, carbon dioxide is not a poison. At times in our Earth's history, we've had far more concentrations of carbon dioxide in the air than what we have. Carbon dioxide is plant food. You wouldn't have green plants growing if you didn't have carbon dioxide, because plants, they produce oxygen when they take in carbon dioxide from the air in the presence of sunlight, and through the process of photosynthesis, it helps them make sugars, carbohydrates, and the byproduct of that is free oxygen.
Also carrots
need
and
it.
celery, lettuce.
You wouldn't have any of that if you didn't have carbon dioxide in the air. Greenhouses pump in extra carbon dioxide to boost production inside of the greenhouse. So
What that one scientist said, they pretty much laughed him out of town when he goes, when you think about it, we're the ones that exhale carbon when we inhale the oxygen that the plants make. So there's your balance right there.
That's the balance, right?
Yeah. And
Planting
they-
trees, that's great. Planting,
Yeah.
shrubs and bushes, that's great. Putting plants in your house, that's great. I mean, it
Yeah.
helps produce more oxygen for you. But I was gonna say the third one, and he touched on it with that phrase. Let me come back up here to find that phrase. Stakeholder capitalism metrics. Anybody heard that one before? Stakeholder capitalism metrics. See, they can't come right out and say they're getting rid of capitalism. They can't come right out and say they're embracing the socialist model for economics. So here's what it is. He says, finally, 2021 will be the year when companies pivot from a strictly short-term profit orientation towards strategies focusing more on the long-term viability of their businesses and on the interest and contributions of all stakeholders. Well, that's just like, the clearest thing in the world, isn't it? But here's what this is saying. All stakeholders means they're going to balance the need to make a profit. Let's say, Chris, you start your own business and you're looking at the bottom line and you're thinking, if I'm fortunate, I might make a 1% profit this year. And then Kim says, well, even though I don't work for you and I'm not even involved in a business like yours, but I'm a stakeholder because what you do affects the air around us and affects the amount of money that's available.
Exactly.
And it affects the community. Therefore, I'm a stakeholder. So I get a say. And even though, you got that 1% profit that's keeping your head above water, I think some of that should go to support public health because I'm a nurse. And so the government says, oh, that makes sense. You're making this money and we need to help all stakeholders, not just you. So what does this sound like? From each according to his means to each according to his need.
You're gonna kill Granny
Who
if you don't give us
who's
money.
that?
Each according to his abilities, each according to
Yeah,
his needs.
Marx. It's Marxism.
Yeah.
That's what this capitalism stakeholder nonsense is.
So
it's
going based on
communism, socialism.
going based on what the guy who owns the vineyard did was wrong then.
Yeah, yeah, they would say he was completely wrong. Here's his development of stakeholder capitalism metrics. He said in 2020, all companies have the tools they need to turn environmental, social, and governance commitments into measurable action. So he's saying in 2021, all companies, big, small, all of them are going to have to measure what they do to contribute to social and government commitments and environment and things like that. So in other words, everybody's going to get a piece of your profit.
But
Now-
COVID's already doing that.
Well, I know they're all three coming together. See, COVID is the means, and it's just that COVID, because it's a new thing, they've managed to scare everybody half to death. There are people out there who are paranoid about this, and that's completely flies in the face of what God said. God didn't give us a spirit of fear,
Yeah.
and yet these people are unreasonably paranoid.
Unreasonably paranoid. My employer, we had a technician who, back I think in April or so, before any of the stay-at-home orders even, just as it was starting to be a big thing, this guy was always a bit of a tinfoil hatter, and what he just up and didn't show up for work, and his resignation notice was a copying and pasting from the World Health Organization website. Copied and pasted that as a text message to the general manager. Something about people need to start staying home or whatever. And he still had keys to a van and a electrical meter, a multimeter, worth about $200 in the company property. And they said, well, okay, well, you at least need to give back your uniforms, and we need that van key and we need that meter back. And so it took him several days for them to, he would not let them come in, he wouldn't come by and drop it off. He wouldn't meet them at his house to get the key. The owner of the company tried to go say, give me my key to my van and my meter back, whatever you want to quit, fine, but
Wouldn't let him in the house.
wouldn't let him in the house. Finally, he came by during off business hours. And I think eventually he did, meet him to give him the key, but he put the voltmeter on the ground in front of the I think it was during business hours, put the voltmeter and maybe the van key in front of the company's mailbox outside and left. And then, like, after he was long gone, sent them a message or something, hey, your stuff's outside. I mean, this was before any DeWine fired up the propaganda machine. It was just,
Yeah, in the beginning, you can almost understand people being scared because nobody knew what was going on. But
And
now,
the media
you know,
was
yeah.
pushing every 15 minutes,
Oh, and-
COVID this, COVID that.
But now we know so much more. We know there's no reason to panic. That most people, even if they get it, are, it's not going to be worse than a bad cold or the flu.
Yeah, that's like
And
what they
so-
told my sister. She had it. She's like, what? And I asked her, I said, how do you feel? She goes, I feel perfectly fine. She hadn't had any asthma problems. She didn't have any bronchitis. And she gets bronchitis and asthma when it gets cold a lot.
And a lot of people do.
Yeah.
So now people are afraid to go to the doctor because they think they're going to be told they have to stay home for a few weeks.
What's funny though is, she goes, I didn't feel a thing. She goes, it's like,
But let me read the end of this thing that Schwab wrote. He said, these three major developments, a renewed focus on public health and resilience, net zero pledges, and the arrival of stakeholder capitalism metrics, all but ensure 2021 will be a new year zero. As in the aftermath of World War II, the building blocks are already in place, providing a foundation on which to construct a new era of improved well-being, inclusive economic growth, and climate action. Now, there's an area that he's not including in here.
and this is why Divine is telling us we're in a war.
But I'm going to say,
The
there's
narrative
something,
fits.
but there's something he's not including in here. And it's something that President Trump, I believe, has really made a push in emphasizing. If anybody caught his Christmas speech, and then on New Year's Eve, he released another speech.
I heard that.
And he is like blatantly talking about pro-Christian themes, because the same people that are calling for this thing with public health and Green New Deal and social, what is it, stakeholder capitalism, metric content.
Actually, he's warning us.
Yeah, but what they're also calling for is all religions have to toe the line and commit to getting along with everybody else and doing nothing that would rock the boat.
Right.
Hillary Clinton
Tolerant.
mentioned this. Yeah, she mentioned this when she was running for president. She said people like us need to change our religious views. Kamala Harris has said much the same thing, that people on the left believe that our views are no longer valid. There's that letter from the secular Democrats that was delivered to Joe Biden just about a month ago now. And the secular Democrats, they're not an obscure group. They're composed. It's like you have the Black Caucus and you have the this caucus and that caucus. It's like the atheist caucus in Congress, although it's not limited to people in Congress. There's people in the state levels around the country and all that. And it's a group pushing the Democrat Party further into an atheistic or non-theistic, for lack of a better term, off-theistic, I guess you could call it. Remember how the Democrat conventions, the last two of them?
Yep.
No mentions of God.
Quite the
None of
opposite.
that.
They took God out of their,
That one guy said,
Right.
okay, we're gonna do this one more time. All those in favor of keeping God in the party, up here, screw you.
So this is another part of that. And this is the area where the Pope is involved. because he is overseeing an effort right now that they are merging all religions. Now, the Muslims go along with it because they have the philosophy of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Until my enemy is defeated, then I'll attack them. So they think they're going to eventually come out on top of all this. The Chinese, Communist Chinese Party, is going along with this too because they think they're going to come out on top of this. Well, eventually, if those are the only two left, they're going to clash. But they're not the only ones. These international billionaires like Soros, and I keep forgetting the name of the guy in the UK that's like their equivalent of George Soros, and
See the
several
one that
others.
owns, Virgin Airlines?
No, that's Richard Branson.
Okay.
This is another guy. He's an older guy. He's like Soros. He's an old guy that got billions, and then of course you look at some like the Rothschilds and groups like that.
Rockefellers.
And they're another group. They think they're going to come out on top. This Charles Schwab or Klaus Schwab is in that group, and they think they're going to come out on top. And so you got all these people. Eventually, when they get rid of people like us, if they're able to, they're going to fight amongst themselves. And we know what the end result is going to be, right? The Antichrist is going to come to power. And we also know and understand that when the Antichrist comes to power, there's going to be divisions because out of the 10 regions that they divide the world up into, at least 3 of them try to rebel against him. And if the, you got the kings of the East coming in during the tribulation as well. So there's going to be dissension in his government, and we should expect that because it's all a bunch of crooks.
As you read that, what is it? Let's see, who explained it? The 4 horsemen are actually what man does to man.
Well, not completely, because look at the 4 horsemen in Revelation chapter 6, I think where we'll start there. The 4 horsemen, and there's a lot of things trying to understand this. Revelation chapter 6 is where the 4 horsemen come in. Remember, the believers have to be taken out of the world. We talked about that. We were over there in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 7. He that withholdeth, the mystery of iniquity is already working, but he's being
He's restrained because
he's being
we
restrained. And the restraining agency of the Holy Spirit is what's being talked about. He that letteth will let, meaning restraining. That's the Holy Spirit, and he's working through us.
Mm-hmm.
Think about this. And I just read an article recently talking about could it, something along the lines of, is it God's will for President Trump to be there 4 more years? Because see, had President Trump not been elected to president 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton would have come in. And what they're talking about doing in 2021 with the Great Reset, they may have been able to do in 2017 or 18. But because President Trump came in, they didn't expect that. And they didn't have their cheating apparatus fully geared up. It caught them by surprise because the Lord intervened. That's all there is to it. God intervened. Now, a lot of people think differently, and that's fine, but I think especially in light of some of the things that President Trump has been saying and doing, I really do believe that he got saved during the latter parts of his campaign. But regardless of whether he got saved or not, if God could use Balaam's donkey, he can use a person. And I believe he's used President Trump, and he certainly used Vice President Pence, and he's used some other godly individuals that are at the high levels of our government to keep these things from coming to pass. But if the rapture takes place, the believers are caught out of the world. Let's say that President Trump gets 4 more years, and Vice President Pence is there 4 more years. This is a big restraint, because even this thing that I read by Klaus Schwab, he's saying 2021 on the basis of a Biden administration. A Trump administration then would do what? Hinder, prevent these things. They cannot do it without America. And you touched on this earlier with the League of Nations.
Yep.
The League of Nations failed. Why? You know?
Oh, I'm
The
trying to think
United
of,
States was not a part of it.
Exactly. They could not get America into it. And President Wilson, who was a big backer of the League of Nations, had a big, like 20-some city speaking trip that he was going on. He was going by rail. While he was on the train, he got sick. That's when he had a stroke.
Yep.
They had to take him back to Washington, D.C. He spent the rest of his presidency basically in a bed with his wife signing things with his name and issuing orders saying, oh, he told me to say that. She literally was the first woman president, Mrs. Wilson. And during that time of his trip, he was going to go to all these cities using all the influence he could muster to get the United States to commit to the League of Nations. Because he was not able to do that because of that stroke, what happened was there was a guy in the Senate, I can't remember his name, but he was very much against it. And he was advocating, and there was also somebody in the House advocating strongly for American nationalism. And
Yep.
because Wilson was silenced, the nationalist voice was amplified, and the United States never went into it.
that's, look what happened to Roosevelt.
I'm just going to say, President Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, said, as long as I'm president, the United States will never recognize a Jewish state
Yep.
in Palestine. Well, a week later, he had his stroke and died. And Harry Truman, who grew up going to a Baptist church where his dad or his grandfather was the pastor, and had always said that there was to be a nation of Israel, a Jewish nation there, against the advice of all of his advisors, against the advice of the Secretary of State, he recognized we were the first country to recognize the new Jewish state of Israel.
That,
And he was told not to do it, but he did it because God raised him up.
that one general that actually left New York City, went over there.
Oh, yeah, because he was Jewish and he went over there.
He served in World War II.
Yeah, and he became like the head of their armed forces or something. He was actually killed by friendly fire, but he had the title that he had. I don't know what the name of the title is. It's the same title that was given to Joshua in the Old Testament. Remember Moses when they went into the
Captain of the host.
something like that? Yeah. But Joshua had that title when he went in to conquer the land, and I think
Basically,
Joab might have had that title too. But that title was given to him, and he became a highly decorated officer, and he's got a monument over there because
Was he the one who made the phone call?
I don't know. No, Trump got I don't know. I'm not sure who it was that went to Truman. But
Yeah.
but when you look at it, we see these times when God intervened. They would have done this great reset 4 years ago or so, 3-4 years ago, if it were not for something totally unexpected happening, Donald Trump becoming president.
Who would have ever thought
No,
Donald Trump
yeah.
would be president?
'Cause I remember hearing interviews with some of his family, his sons and his daughter and all. They were saying, basically, they said on the eve of the election, he thought he lost.
Yes.
Either Eric Trump or Donald Trump Jr. was talking to, I think it was Sean Hannity, shortly after that, and said, he said, how's your father doing? Or how was he doing on election night? He said, well, he was in a room kind of quiet by himself, just sort of watching things on TV. He thought he lost.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, boom, out of, surprise, everybody. And,
Because I figured it was about 7 o'clock. I think
well,
it
about
was.
9 o'clock's when it started to turn. And
Actually,
that
I
was-
knelt down in front of the couches just before 7 o'clock. I said, Lord, don't let her win.
Well,
This is
and
like,
what was it? About 8, 9 o'clock Eastern time was when they had a prayer thing in Jerusalem where they started praying for the American presidential election. And then the tide started turning, and then you had the other group. There was a Christian TV network here started calling for prayer across the country. So we've seen it happen before. We've seen God directly intervene. We know He directly intervened in the founding of our country. You know, you look at the stories of things that happened during the Revolutionary War. You know, when George Washington was pinned down, and he was in New York, wasn't he? And they knew there was no escape. And then this fog rolls in out of nowhere, and instead of dissipating, it stays all morning. And Washington evacuates his troops across the Hudson, I believe it was, over to Jersey. And it wasn't until the last boat got ashore or across the river that the fog started lifting. The British couldn't do anything. Didn't even know they were gone because you couldn't hardly see across, the end of the boat.
Yeah, and they would not start shooting because they'd probably be shooting their own men.
Yeah, and so as a consequence, and that's just one thing. Even before that, George Washington fighting in the French and Indian Wars, the one Indian chief that was on the side of the French, they sought to target George Washington. And they had been given firearms by the French, and George Washington had horses shot out from underneath him. His coat had holes in it, but he never got struck by a bullet. And later on, the Indian chief that was in that battle actually came to Christ, and he met George Washington. And George Washington asked him about the battle, and he said, "There's a point in the battle where you basically told everybody stop firing at me. Why did you do it?" And he said, "Because none of our bullets were having any effect. You were being protected." So God has plans, and he doesn't always directly intervene like that, but sometimes he does. It wasn't just in the Old Testament and in the New Testament that God actively intervened.
So
He's done that throughout history. With the Battle of Dunkirk, remember, in World War II, the British troops were pinned down. And again, it was another case where, what was it? The weather came in and everything. Was it a fog in that case? And the Germans weren't able to get them. And all around the Britain on the coast, everybody that had a boat started getting this idea, I need to get in my boat and cross the channel right now. It wasn't like somebody getting on a telegraph going, dee, 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 telling everybody and rallying anybody that had a boat to go across. And you had fishing boats, you had ferry boats, you had pleasure boats, you had anything and everything. And they went over to Dunkirk and they loaded up the British soldiers and they brought them back across the channel.
they got about half the French soldiers off too.
And French too. And that enabled them to survive until we were able to get into the war and everything like that. It just things like that happen too often in our nation's history. Why do we think they cannot happen today? And that's what I personally pray. I'm praying that God does something miraculous here on January 6th or whenever it is that he does it. And that the best designs
I
of the
think
devil.
Pence is gonna shine like. Because I mean,
Yeah.
he's
I have a hard time with it. Did you see these politicians?
President,
Yeah.
Barr, Dunham, Barr left us hanging. He just, whatever happened to that?
Yep. But you did my report after the election, and
But
he just ups and quits, and they're like,
President Trump did say something about Durham, and he did authorize, who was it that he authorized to tell that Durham can now use classified materials. And so there's something going on behind the scenes. And I had this, let's see if I can see it here real quick. I had seen this tweet here just recently, reprinted. It's a matter of going back trying to find it here. Let's see. Let's see. This was no, that's not the one that I want. But there was something tweeted out just recently that President Trump is calling for all patriots to come to Washington, D.C. on the 6th, and says that they're going on talking about it and saying there's something very big in the works. And there's just all these things that are taking place
He
that,
posted something on Facebook too about that.
He did.
yeah, I'm trying to find it here. Oh, here it is. In a tweet Friday, President Donald Trump announced that massive amounts of evidence will be presented on the 6th. We won big. And also he retweeted Senator Josh Hawley's statement that he had on objecting during the Electoral College certification vote. And then says January 6th, this is what the president posted about January 6th. The big protest rally in Washington, D.C. will take place at 11 a.m. on January 6th. Location details to follow. Stop the steal. Now, what's interesting is nobody seems to know what he's got planned. People familiar with Tom Zelkowski?
Yeah.
He had a thing he just put out, and he said he went on several sites and called people trying to figure out what exactly is going on. And the most that anybody can get is some generic things about when and where. But there's nothing coming out about why, other than stop the steal. And these promises that something big is going to happen. So it all could turn out to be a nothing, or January 6th could be one of the most historic days in our lifetime.
Yep.
You know, somewhere in between.
There are people threatening on YouTube to, saying, yeah, we're going to DC and we're going armed in spite of the law. So,
Yeah, and if there's so many, they can't stop them all.
Yeah, good luck.
And also Antifa groups there's a thing out there, can't vouch for the validity of it, but it's enough to indicate there could be some truth to it about Antifa people dressing in pro-Trump garb, but wear your MAGA hat backward to recognize each other. You know, it's just, these are the things that are out there, and you still had that thing with the acting defense secretary introducing Vice President Trump at that speech, that thing that he spoke at a week or two ago, where he thanked him. He said, I'm going to go off script, and he thanked him for helping, with the most complex military operation ever in the U.S.
Ooh.
So
Is that
what?
Because I keep hearing things about a military tribunal and a civil court. So that would basically, they would be, American citizens will now be charged as spies.
Well, you don't.
Now, is that
you
how
can
that works?
Yeah, you don't need a military tribunal to do that. But the other thing, though, is a military tribunal would certainly be more able, probably, to try people on treason and sedition charges.
Yeah.
And insurrection.
That's what
Deal with
happened to
insurrection.
Biden, his son.
Yep.
Clinton, Obama.
Yep.
And
Round everybody
all
up.
need to be
Yeah.
tried. Maybe he's gonna
And-
do that.
I mean, you had this big thing on, I'm trying to remember when it was now, because it's just so much stuff. It's like every day there's several major things that happen. What was it? On Christmas Eve, I believe it was, the Friday before Christmas, the week before Christmas, I think is what it was. They had a big meeting at the White House in the Oval Office. And Sidney Powell was there, General Flynn was there, Giuliani was there, Pompeo was there, the vice president was there, all these different people were there.
They had a CIA operative that actually
Yeah.
ratted the whole thing out.
And
That's what that
this
was.
is why they're cutting the CIA out of stuff, is because the CIA is much more, left leaning, generally speaking.
Yeah,
so
they want the one world order.
some of them do, some of them don't. But as a whole, the CIA tends to run more to the left than, say, the NSA. And the FBI, the rank and file has tended to run more to the right, and the upper echelons run more to the left. There needs to be a rebate.
There's a lot of rank and file guys in the FBI that are just like, they're hoping that this happens.
So, but one thing that Pence did oversee is the COVID response stuff. And all over the country right now, we have activated Guard and Reserve units in major urban centers passing out vaccines
Or
and active duty.
they also have active guards in major centers.
passing out food.
And food, yes, they've been doing that too. And
That was
people
the
are
first
used
thing
to
they
them.
did.
People are used to seeing them.
And they're
So-
talking in California, you know, they might have 3,000 people line up and they
Mhm.
have active guard duty. And
Mhm.
even in Cleveland,
Yes.
passing out.
So people are used to seeing it. So
Right,
people are
it's
seeing
normal.
these military troops in our major cities right now, and they're not thinking anything of it because, well, they're helping pass out food. They're
Right.
helping orchestrate the vaccine distribution.
Yeah.
But
What was that thing in Nashville then?
the thing at Nashville, was, there's still a lot of interesting speculation on that, because what they attacked, if you were just some disgruntled nutcase that wanted to attack AT&T, why would you go to a nondescript building when right down the block there is the big glitzy AT&T built, what did they call it, the Bat Tower?
Yeah.
With the big AT&T logo all over the top of it? Wouldn't you go there?
Right.
That building was a regional telecommunications switching center, of which we have right over here toward Medina. You know where Fenn Road hits Route 3?
There's one on West Market Street.
One in Brexville.
No, not to the level of this one.
Oh.
This is a major telecommunications switching center. What this is a hardened thing. I was talking to my brother. My brother, when he got out of high school, my older brother, that one of the first jobs that he had, and this is going back to like 1977, 78 timeframe, late 70s, was servicing fire extinguishers. Did you ever know Zis down here when you had the fire services? He was right down here on Cleveland, Mass, on Brecksville Road. Did you ever know him? Ed Zis, I think it was. But
I remember that
he was right
place.
down. But anyway, he was down there. But my brother worked for him. He went into the station out there on Fenn Road and Medina line, or in Route 3. And he went in, and when you go by the road, you see a big open field with a driveway going back there and several power lines going into it. And you see this building back there, and there's a couple other little things. And he said that when he went in, he went down 3 floors, 3 levels, before where he got into the main entrance to where he went in for servicing fire extinguishers. And he said going down, you could look through, it had that metal grate, you know, on the steps and all that. He said you could look down a ways. And he said that when he was in there, when he came out, he looked up, and there's a crane up above on a big I-beam. It was a 40-ton crane that's there. And the front facade of the building is stationary. The rest of the building opens up so that you can move stuff in there and drop stuff down in there. Now, that was interesting. Well, when I was in the Air Force, a guy that I worked with, he was a little bit older, and he had been here in the Cleveland area for a while in the Air Force, and he went down 6 levels into that facility. And he was telling me about some of the things that he saw. And he said it went down below that. I talked to somebody who retired from the Bell system, and I said something about it, and he said that he had been there. And I said, well, how deep does it go? And he looked at me and he said, oh, it's only like one basement underneath. It's just a basement underneath there. There's nothing. So I got my brother who said he'd been down 3 levels, and he saw it went way down below that. I got another guy from the Air Force who's been down 6 levels, and he said it went down below that, and there's a 40-ton crane. And I got this guy that retired from the Bell system saying, oh, no, there's just a basement in that building, nothing else. So who do I believe?
You need a 40-ton crane for to move telephone switches.
Yeah, well, what happens, and this is what happens at these switching centers, and this is why this one's different than what's up here. It goes underground. It's a hardened site because it's critical infrastructure. All the telecommunications, we're talking about in southern Canada, in Chicago, Philadelphia, and all this area is going through there, and it controls all the traffic. It's just like the major transmission nodes on the power system. You know, where you have these major stations, like what do they call them? With the substations, not substations, but they're the major nodes on the power distribution network. Well, that's what these are. And so everything in this area
It's
goes
like
through there.
air traffic control.
Yeah, Oberlin is the major node for between Chicago and Philadelphia.
That's the
and
one
New
that
York.
was,
That's why it's the most
Cleveland Center.
active. Yeah, Cleveland Center, but it's Oberlin. And
Yeah.
it's the busiest one in the country because of all the traffic between Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, things
Not
like
to
that.
mention coming up out of Florida.
Yeah, and so as a result, it could be somebody's attempt to attack that. Somebody speculated that they thought because there were servers inside of there that had the Dominion stuff in them, that they were trying
Wow.
to destroy that in order to take out evidence or something. It's where it gets kind of interesting because essentially they tried to blow up a site that's hardened during the Cold War era, you know, for other things than an RV full of explosives. And so I'm sure there's more to it than what we're seeing.
There's somebody with a loudspeaker. Get away from here! It's a bomb in here. It's
Well,
like,
and that's another thing, because when it went off before, when the call was made, the call was not a bomb scare. The call was shots fired. Shots fired is guaranteed to bring the police out
Yeah.
quickly. A bomb threat would have brought the bomb squad out quickly. But they didn't know anything about a bomb until they got there. And then the recording started saying, in 15 minutes, it's going to blow up, you know. And that's when they called the bomb squad. And so, you know, there's things that happen that we'll never know about and we can speculate about,
Mhm.
but some things it's probably good that we don't know about. But there's different groups, you know, it's not all one group. There's different groups vying and competing with each other, and then you want to throw in a little bit of confusion and things like that. And
That's why they're overblowing this COVID scare.
yeah, because it's what you saw with what Klaus Schwab had to say. It's designed to move in, and we got away from, you were asking about the in Revelation chapter 6, the four horsemen. But notice what in tying this into that, he says here in Revelation chapter 6, verse 1, and when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder, one of the four beasts saying, "Come and see." And I saw and behold a white horse, and he that sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. And this is probably the revelation of the Antichrist, and this is with the beginning of the tribulation period, because the purpose of the white horse, you know, a conquering king would come in on a white horse, and he has a bow and a crown was given unto him. The bow, but he doesn't really have arrows with it. He comes in, he has, you know, the impression of military arms and all that, but he's not necessarily using them. And a crown is given to him. And so this would be, you know, probably the revelation of the Antichrist, because in when you look at the key to the book of Revelation, it's back in chapter number 1. And let's see here. Chapter number 1, verse 19. This is the key to the book of Revelation. Revelation 1, verse 19. Write the things which thou hast seen, and the things which are, and the things which shall be hereafter. And then he goes on to talk about the candlesticks, which is important too, but we're not going to look at that right at the moment. The things which thou hast seen is a reference to what he's describing in chapter 1, where he's there on the Isle of Patmos and he hears the noise and he looks and he sees the Lord standing in the candlesticks and all that. That's what he's seen. Then he says, and the things which are. That corresponds to chapter 2 and chapter 3, which is the dispensation of grace that we're in now. Some people, you know, mistakenly call it the church age, and I even use that sometimes myself, but really it's not the proper term. But it's the age of grace is what it is. And there appears to be 7 periods in this time frame that we're in right now, and they're identified and indicated by these 7 churches. The 7 churches in chapters 2 and 3 are actual churches in John's day. And each one of them had characteristics, but the characteristics of those churches correspond to 7 successive periods in, the time since John. And then he says there in chapter 1, verse 19, and the things which shall be hereafter. And that's chapter 4 on. Okay, so we have the things that he saw when he was standing on the island. And then he said, right about the things which is the church dispensation, the age of grace, dispensation of grace, however you want to say it. And then the things which shall be hereafter. And if you look at chapter 4, in verse 1, it starts out, after this. Okay, after this, which means after the things which are. After the description of the churches and the dispensation of grace in chapters 2 and 3, after this, I looked and behold, a door was opened in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was as it were of a trumpet talking with me, which said, come up hither, and I will show thee things which must be hereafter, that hereafter that we saw. So this is a picture of the rapture, the catching away of the believers. After the church's time was finished, he says, now come on up here and you'll see what happens hereafter. So after those things, he gets caught up into heaven. He's a picture of the believers being caught up into heaven. And then the things which shall be hereafter begin to be explained. This is one of the things that indicates that the Christians will be caught out of the world into heaven before the tribulation occurs. Now, the tribulation does not occur with the catching away of the believers. I know we saw there in 2 Thessalonians, the mystery of iniquity is already working, it's being hindered. But the hindrance is now off. The devil doesn't know when this is going to happen. He's got to be ready at any time. He sure seems to be feeling it might happen this year if he's talking about bringing in a global government in the year 2021. So all these things are being primed. When we're taken out of here, apparently there might be a period of time, days, weeks, months, potentially even years, but I doubt that it would go that long. I think it'd be more like weeks, maybe months. But during the course of that time, there's some events that we read about in chapter 4 and chapter 5. And in chapter 5 is when the book with the 7 seals is brought forward. And then in chapter 6 is when they begin to be opened. And the first seal is the revelation of the Antichrist, the rider on the white horse. That's not Jesus, though he comes on a white horse at the end of the tribulation in Revelation 19. But he comes with a sword going out of his mouth and slays the enemies. This guy here comes and he conquers and, he sets up a government. Okay, now the second seal takes place in Revelation 6, verse number 3. So the first one would be the Antichrist. Now, we know from Daniel chapter 9 also that the 7-year period, which is what the tribulation period is, begins when the prince of the people that come, they weren't there yet when Daniel was writing this, destroy the rebuilt temple, which was the temple that existed when Jesus was here on earth. When the people that come destroy that temple, a prince of that people will be the one that signs a covenant with the Jewish people, bringing this 7-year peace period in. Okay, the temple was rebuilt. The Romans came on the scene, then the temple was rebuilt. Then after Jesus has been crucified, resurrected, then ascended up into heaven, in the year 70, the Romans came in and ransacked and destroyed Jerusalem and the temple.
That's where they
So Titus came in and
They had to use fire to get
Yeah,
all the gold out
they
of the
set on
wall.
fire, the gold melted and stuff and went down, they levered the stones apart to get at it where it ran down in there.
Mhm.
So then what happened then is the prince of that people, which is why we say the Antichrist, the beast, son of perdition, man of sin, those are all titles given to the same guy, will come out of the revived Roman Empire, which would indicate Europe. And that's where the hotbed of globalism seems to be, is Europe. So this guy comes on the scene and he's able to sign a covenant with the Jewish people, which brings in that 7-year tribulation period. That's what inaugurates it. And that appears to be about the time of the opening of the first seal, the white horse and all of that. We've speculated before that the catching away of the believers could take place during the battle that's outlined. I know we're going through a lot, and I'm trying to do it quickly because it's getting 8:45. But
Psalm 83 battle.
in Psalm 83, right? And that in that battle there, Israel is almost destroyed, but not. And certain areas around them are described as being destroyed: Syria and Lebanon and Egypt, and what would amount to Iraq and a small portion of Iran today. Okay, now when you fast forward then to Ezekiel 38, which people think about that big battle that's there, Egypt and Lebanon and Iraq, and the area that encompasses, what did I say? Egypt and Syria and Lebanon, and what encompasses Iraq and a part of Iran today, which was called Elam. Those areas are not mentioned in Ezekiel 38. A lot of people said, well, you just can't mention everybody. Well, I don't think they're mentioned there because they're already been destroyed. But in that Psalm 83 battle, in the aftermath of that, if Israel is nearly destroyed, but their enemies around them are destroyed, now I'm just going to throw something out, pure speculation. I've heard conflicting things on this. I've heard that the travel has been, they canceled the trip. But supposedly after Mike Pence does his duty on January 6th, he was supposed to travel out of the country right after that. And he was supposed to wind up over in Israel. Now, if you were expecting something to happen here, violent, and you wanted to ensure the survivability of our country and ensure the survivability of the patriots, wouldn't it make sense to relocate some senior leadership outside of the country? But I also heard a story that said that no, they canceled it. So I it's hard to say what to believe because things go out and then they try to cover it up and confuse you.
Well, and the Antichrist, then he confirms the covenant, and it's interesting because Trump's making all these agreements now.
Mhm.
Yeah, but he's making them with Saudi Arabia. And
Well,
those
but Morocco is
Yeah.
one of the ones that's in the Confederation against Israel during the Ezekiel 38 battles. But what I was going to say is, if the Psalm 83 battle, let's say that it was triggered because if Joe Biden should become president and be sworn in on the 20th, there's no need for the globalists to attack the United States because he's just going to hand us right over into the whole thing because he's on board and all the people he wants to put in power are on board with it. Why do you have to destroy something? It's like you're going to hijack an airliner and the pilot is saying, "Okay, fine, I'm with you. Where are we going?" You don't have to beat him up. You don't have to shoot him or kill him or anything because he's with you. He's doing what you want. The only time you have to attack him is if he's not going to do what you want him to do. So if Trump becomes president and he's elected inaugurated on January 20th, then you can see where all these stories about Chinese troops in Canada and Mexico and Central America become a bit concerning because maybe they want to attack the United States. Maybe they want to take out our infrastructure. Maybe it's a series of concerted attacks, to take down our power system, our communications, telecommunication systems, targeted EMP attacks or, more broad EMP attacks. We'd be blind. Nobody would know what's happening. No phone, no internet, no radio, no TV, nothing. You wouldn't know anything except somebody you talk to, unless somebody's got a vacuum tube ham radio set up that they can press it.
Which is,
But,
they've been
um,
stockpiling them.
yeah,
So
and
it's
so
yeah.
during that time, could you see the Chinese troops in Canada and Mexico saying, we're coming in with humanitarian aid? Because they estimate a major electromagnetic pulse attack on the United States, they estimate that within a year, 90% of our population would be dead. And the reason is, okay, if you live in Cleveland, you see these people who are moving into these high-rise apartment buildings in Cleveland. So let's say you're living on the 12th floor in downtown Cleveland. Where does your water come from? If there's no electricity, how do you get water? You're on the 12th floor. Walk to Lake Erie. So now, okay, how are you going to get down to Lake Erie? You got to go down 12 flights of stairs and go to Lake Erie, walk to Lake Erie, get your water, and then you got to walk back up 12 flights of stairs. Okay, what if it's dark? There's no lights because there's no electricity. And there's certainly no heat. There's no heat. There's no power. There's no anything. And you don't know what's going on. And what do you suppose is going to happen in all of those areas of people who are used to the government feeding them every week?
Well,
where are they going to look for food?
Death becomes them.
So you're going down with your jugs to get some water, and you don't have any food, but you're perceived as being one of the rich because you're living in a high-rise apartment, and you're a couple of blocks from the hood. What do they think? You see where disruption takes place? What about somebody who's in the hospital, in the ICU? You say, well, their emergency generators kick in.
You got 3 days of fuel at best.
What about the electronics if they're fried?
So even
They got
if they don't,
nothing.
if the grid's down,
Yeah.
they got 3 days of
But
power.
if they do survive that, you're right, they got 3 days. I remember the base that I was at, we had generators, but once the fuel runs out, if you can't be refueled, and if you say, well, we'll just go to the station and get some. Well, how you get it out of the ground? The pumps are run by what? Electricity, right? So how do you get it out of the ground? And what about food? How much food? It's a shame Joe's not here tonight because he works at Giant Eagle at their warehouse. How much food do you suppose your local grocery store? How many days or weeks worth of food do they have on hand at your local
Is that
grocery
like 2
store?
weeks?
Not even.
That's maybe 2 days.
It'll get plummeted within a 24
Yeah,
hours.
they have maybe
Yeah.
a couple of days worth of food. But what's going to happen? People are going to break in. So then the warehouses, like where Joe works, you're going to say
I'll
something.
just say, I service supermarkets mainly for a living. The back rooms of most supermarkets is mostly popping liquor.
Yeah.
Is about 2/3 to 3/4 popping liquor. It's not pasta and pasta sauce and the stuff. And unless they're having a big sale on that, there might be a few pallets, but it's almost by space, it's almost all popping liquor. So what you see on the shelf, that's what you got.
Yeah. And I've noticed that too when things are out on the shelf because they have a sale or something. I'll say, well, can you check in the back? And they say, oh, there's nothing in the back.
Well, and
They're
that's
not
what-
lying.
And that's what's
Yeah.
happening. This lockdown has turned so many people to drugs and alcohol.
Mhm.
Where
Yeah.
Giant Eagle, where I live now, the footprint of beer and liquor and wine it's the size itself of the old Fisher Fazio's I grew up going to.
Yeah.
I
It's
mean,
amazing.
you can't avoid it, and then
No.
you think you're past it, but then no, there's display
There's more,
after
yeah.
display after display of this on sale seasonal stuff.
You know Missionary Spencer Smith,
I think I've heard the name. but I don't
IBOM
know
missionary
him.
to Kenya.
I don't know him personally, but the name sounds familiar.
He posted this today. 5 years from now, you put on an old jacket and find a mask in a pocket. And you'll think those were some wild days. Then you'll finish sharpening your machete, put another stripper clip into your SKS, and set out to find food in the valley before the Cannibal Raiders head south for the winter.
I read this one time, that is, one state,
Break that
Virginia,
for me.
Oh,
that's got their electrical grid hardened, and think it's Maine,
Me?
one of the states in the union.
Yeah. Well, I did hear a guy from out west somewhere, wasn't Texas, I think he was more like toward, Idaho, Montana area. And he said that some of the companies have been hardening. And President Trump has done more to try and harden the grid. And they estimate they could harden our power grid and everything against EMP attacks for less than the money that's contained inside of the stimulus bill.
Yep.
Just, $100 billion or something like that, and they could do it all.
That's why
The power companies are all privately owned.
Yeah, and a lot of them don't
They're
want
gonna
to,
do
but a
it.
lot of them are doing it on their own, but they're not saying what they're doing. But they've done studies where they could actually do this, and the money available, and it's for less than what they're spending on some, it's probably no more than what they're gonna send to Pakistan for gender equality studies or some nonsense, it's
now,
this
so that
ridiculous thing.
means
That really helps us with COVID, doesn't it?
those two nuclear power plants here in Ohio that they're
Mhm.
trying to save, but they're getting ready to say, oh, well, we're gonna close them. Those have the old style, the old hardware.
Yeah, because they've been around for a little while.
Yeah,
Yeah, but it's not their hardware that's the problem, it's everybody else's.
Mhm.
You won't have a
Right.
radio that works, you won't have the car that runs, you won't have anything.
And you won't have anything to control the power transmission, because the nodes will be out, the controls will be out. Because you can't just take power out of the power plant and run it into your house. It's
no, you have to have
that's
all
why
the
you got
down.
transformers and all those different substations. and
Yeah, because
everything.
50,000 volts into your house, it's just whoosh.
Imagine substations exploding, and some of the transformers that they have, we don't have replacements for.
Nope.
And we don't even build them here.
Made in China.
China and Korea, South Korea built some. And so you can see the Chinese sitting there, and they might have some of these things with them, and they say, we're coming in. And of course, just like what the Chinese have done in third world countries to go in and help out, there's always strings.
Shackles come with shackles.
Yes. Yep. There's always something that they're looking for. And they're going to come in, and that's what I think they will try to do. But if this took place during that Psalm 83 thing, I was going to say this, if Vice President Pence is in Israel, can you see a reason that the globalists might instigate an attack on Israel? Because we want to decapitate the patriots in America. We want to take out the Trump administration, and since they're trying to survive over here in Israel, we got to attack them too. And what better way to do it than to use our stooges in Lebanon and Syria, places like that, Egypt. And so in the aftermath of that, if we disappear, nobody's going to know what's going on. And this would be the option for the Antichrist to come to power and the white horse there. But it's interesting, the next thing that you see, getting back to Revelation chapter 6 and verse 3, when he'd opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, come and see. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. So now war breaks out. There's going to be a lot of fighting. And we know that the Antichrist is going to divide the world into 10 regions. A lot of times people say, well, it's going to be 10 kingdoms in Europe. The European Union went beyond 10 nations, and so they were trying to refigure that. But you see, and I've been seeing since the 1970s, various globalist groups divide up the world into 10. They're always doing 10 government regions. There's always 10. Well, sometimes they vary a little bit in the makeup of them, but it's like 10 regions. They always see they like the number 10. Well, here it says in the Bible you'd have 10 kingdoms, and he'd have kings over them, and 3 of them appear to rebel. Maybe that's where this war comes in, and he has to put 3 of them down. And then the next thing that you see, verse 5, and he'd open the third seal, and I see the third beast say, come and see, and behold, I beheld and lo, a black horse, and him that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 beasts say, measured wheat for a penny. A penny would have been a day's wages. A measured wheat would have been what you needed to eat for a day's rations of wheat. 3 measures of barley for a penny. So barley was cheaper. You could get 3 days rations of barley for a penny. And see thou hurt not the oil and the wine, which suggests that the more, luxury items are unscathed, but people are going to be scraping by. Where perhaps the richer people are surviving a little better. But what follows war a lot of times? Famine. Because, you don't have crops and things like that. And if the United States has been devastated too, we're not feeding the world. So, and then the verse 7, and open the fourth seal, and I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, come and see. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed him. And power is given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with sword and with hunger and with death and with the beasts of the earth. And this follows the famine, people rioting, people killing animals, attacking people. And then so that's your four horsemen there. So you've got the first one, the white horse, which is probably the rise of the Antichrist and the global government. The second one is the horse of war. The third one is the famine, and then the fourth one is rioting and things of that nature, rioting and death.
So that war, famine, pestilence, and death.
Yeah, kind of as a way you could kind of look at that. Yeah, and but as you can see, this naturally follows if there's some kind of war going on, and this brings us into the events of the tribulation period. This is the beginning of it, and there are people who are going to come to Christ during the tribulation period, and it makes it very clear in verse number 9 where he says he opened the fifth seal. And I saw under the altar the souls of them which were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? And white robes were given unto every one of them. And it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were should be fulfilled. And so what we see happening there is
That goes back
an
on the
attack
radio.
on
Before you come on, they're always saying that we're going through the tribulation.
the Sunday night, the West Virginia boys.
Yeah, and I'm like,
Yeah.
that's not right, because you go back to.
No, they don't believe any of this. They believe that the Battle of Armageddon was at the cross of Calvary. I've heard them say that and defend that more than once. It's very convoluted how they do that, but that's their reasoning is, well, the Battle of Armageddon is the final battle, and what final battle could there be than Jesus' final battle on the cross of Calvary? Except that Armageddon is not the final battle in the Bible anyways. There's the Gog and Magog war over 1,000 years later. So, but at any rate, they don't see that at all.
They're also Jesus only. They're also Jesus only.
Yeah, they've got a lot of theological problems. But this is interesting because that fifth seal there tells us something that we're seeing right now. We're seeing right now that secular Democrats thing said that people like us need to be put into re-education camps because our views are not acceptable. Not acceptable in the new world order. We need to be re-educated. But what's China? They're specialists in re-education camps, aren't they?
If you look at it, I don't know if you guys mentioned it, I heard it maybe today on your show, but it's the same thing they did to the Jews with the Nazis.
Mhm.
That they're doing with Antifa and BLM.
Mhm.
Exactly.
And it's going to oppose Christians. If you don't get in line with their race and what their belief is, maybe it's not necessarily race, but they're using race as a weapon against Bible
What
believing
Hitler did.
born again Christians, and that's exactly what they're doing now. It may not be
Hitler had the media lock, stock, and barrel too.
so.
Yeah,
I mean, it's going to happen. You can just see it. History just is going to keep repeating itself.
Well, and this suggests that one of the things that the Antichrist is going to do, the new global order is going to do, is they're going to ban religious views like ours. And look to China. That's the example. What are they doing right now? Thousands of Christians in China, especially a lot of pastors and stuff in China, are disappearing. Not that the government's taking, there's enough of them going that way, but they have left. They disappeared off into the hinterlands of China because of the persecution becoming so great in China right now. Pastors and Christians in China by the thousands are disappearing into the. China's a big country.
I think God's gonna deal with China in a big way pretty soon. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, I agree with that statement because
That's what's going on.
they're
in
not
Hong
going to
Kong.
be the world leader that they think they're going to be. They want to be the world leader.
Mhm.
That's what I'm saying. You got the Chinese Communist Party over here, and you got the Muslims over here, and then you got the entrenched European interests, which would represent the Rothschilds and Prince Charles and the
Bankers.
Schwab and all those people over here. Which one, according to the scriptures, likely going to be the ones that win out? It's going to be the European ones because that's where the Antichrist comes out of, prince of the people that come. So, it could very well be that January 6th could be that historical moment that serves as the catalyst of this taking place. So it's good to be prayed up. It's good to pray for our country, pray for our president, pray for each other. And there are people right now, I know, that are trying to take steps to be prepared. And so we need to pray. And my hope is that, I'd like to see and we have so many votes, and you get to see President Trump raise his hand on the 20th and take his oath of office again. And then somewhere after that, the rapture take place. What is it? We saw a picture today where they're taking down the seating in DC that they had set up for the inauguration. Because, they take it down because Biden has said we're not going to have people show up. We're having a COVID safe inauguration.
Because nobody would.
Well, he can't get anybody for anything. The guy that gets more votes than anybody in history can't get, and even in the most admired man in America, President Trump, and followed by Obama, and he's a distant third.
I saw something on
Makes no
Facebook that said, I would sooner believe a report of Bigfoot riding the Loch Ness Monster to an Elvis concert than I would believe that Joe Biden got 78 million legal votes.
I think I would agree with that. That's a good mental picture of that. All right, let's go ahead and pray. And hey, there's plenty of sauerkraut and pork over there. I'd have eaten more, but with talking, I can't eat too much, so I'm going to eat some now. But there's plenty over there to eat, so you don't have to race out of here. We've got the room till midnight, so we've done that before. Hopefully not tonight, but at any rate, let's go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you again that we can look to you. We can look to you for guidance and direction, your word. Father, we do hope and pray that Donald Trump will be victorious, and that people who are patriots, people who are believers will just win out here, and that you'll see Donald Trump even on the 20th sworn in for 4 more years. And Lord, we just pray that you would have your hand upon him and Vice President Pence, especially coming up on the 6th. And we know that the whole world's attention is going to be focused on what happens during that time. And just pray that you would be with the people that are there in Washington, D.C. at that time, protect and watch over them. And we just pray for a miracle, Lord. We pray that you would give President Trump 4 more years. And we know that he might come back before that time's up. That's fine. But we do pray that you would allow him to get that 4 more years and that it would be certified. And we just pray again that you would watch over us in the midst of all this. Help us not to be given over to the spirit of fear, Lord, that we would look to you and look to you for direction, for safety, and for guidance in all these things. Watch over us now as we leave here tonight. Keep us safe on the roads. Bless the day tomorrow, and especially just have your hand upon us Sunday for your glory. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. I would have turn this off back here.
Next door actually has a small Bible section. And they actually have some Bible covers. But most of these covers are for this.
All right. Good night. Happy New Year. And we're going to sign off on here. So good night.
Oh, my God.